Welcome to the National Gallery. I'm Molly Donovan, Curator of Contemporary Art here at the National Gallery. And I'm very happy to be introducing Janine Antoni today. She is the Elson Lecture. This is the annual Elson Lecture that you're attending that was endowed by the Honorable and Mrs. Edward E. Elson. And it features distinguished contemporary artists whose work is represented in the gallery's collection. Janine Antoni's work, Lick and Lather, dating from 1993, was acquired for the gallery's permanent collection by the Collectors Committee. And it's on view right now in our upper-level galleries in an installation entitled Bodies of Work. So if you haven't seen it, please do so after the lecture. Janine Antoni was born in Freeport, Bahamas in 1964, graduated from Sarah Lawrence College, and received her MFA from Rhode Island School of Design. She has lived and worked in Brooklyn for more than 30 years, accumulating awards and honors, including a Genius Grant from the MacArthur Foundation in 1998, a Guggenheim Fellowship in 2011, and the Anonymous Was a Woman Award in 2014, just to name a few. She participated in the Venice, Whitney, Johannesburg, Istanbul, Gwangju, and Korea biennials, among others, and has been featured in exhibitions and collections worldwide, from MoMA in New York to the Moderna Museet in Stockholm, Sweden. Antoni's performative work regularly transforms the processes of daily rituals, like eating, washing, sleeping, and turns them into art. To create her art, Antoni has consistently employed her body as a tool, upending more traditional modes of art making. She insists that the process becomes the end and the material the means for her work. Her results create a rich intermedia oeuvre comprising photography, video, sculpture, and installation that weave together primal concerns of the mind and body. As she has said, all of my objects sort of walk the line between sculpture, performance, and relic. Anytime I use performance, it's not so much my interest in performance, but my interest in bringing you back to the making. We're thrilled to have Janine here as this year's Elson Lecture. Please join me in welcoming her.
Thank you, Molly. Thank you for such a beautiful show, for including me in it and supporting me. I'm going to start right in, and I'm going to start with a really early piece, a piece I did just out of school. And the reason I'm showing you this piece is that it kind of mapped out a certain territory that my work from this point on has followed. What you're looking at here are negative impressions in the wall. The first image you see is my breast, the second my nipple, 3 latex nipples, baby bottle tops. And the last form is the packaging that they come in. You know, when you go to the drugstore, everything you buy has that vacuum form packaging with the cardboard backing. Well, they stack and fit into that form. And the important moment for me in this kind of visual sentence is the moment between the real nipple and the latex nipple. All the objects I deal with are something like that latex nipple. They mediate our intimate interaction with the body, they replace the body, or they somehow define the body within the culture. So this piece is called Wean, and I was thinking of stages of separation from the mother. So I was trying to figure out how can I make a piece about absence that is there present in the room. So what I did is I took the existing architecture and scoop these forms out of it so you could feel like something was missing. But more importantly than the stages of separation from the mother, I was interested in stages of separation we experience with our own bodies as we're weaned into the culture. So this is my brother and we are pouring 500 pounds of chocolate. And this was a long process. I had to wake him up every 4 hours in the middle of the night for us to pour another 50 pounds so that the cooling process could be even. And there you have it as a cube, and I chewed on it for about a month and a half. Same mold, this time 500 pounds of lard. And believe it or not, I chewed on that as well. And I was very excited with my white cube, and I went out to celebrate, and when I got home, the entire thing had collapsed onto the ground. And I had to make some quick decisions. Should I mix wax? Should I put a cooling unit in it? And I decided if this is what 500 pounds of lard does, that's what I should let happen. And it seemed very conceptually in keeping, in the sense that we all know how hard it is to control fat in our own bodies. So then I took the materials from those two forms. The chocolate that I bit off, I melted down and cast into this heart-shaped packaging for chocolate candy. And the lard that I spit out, I mixed with pigment and beeswax and made these lipstick. And then I made a display unit where I put all my products in. And this is the first piece I did out of graduate school. So I was looking at a lot of artists you're very familiar with. I was certainly thinking about minimalism, and I thought I was being hilarious by chewing on the minimalist cube, but the talk at the time was that this was an angry critique of patriarchal art history. Nobody quite got the joke. And then I was also very influenced by Gober's work and the handmade ready-made, so this was kind of like material that had moved through my body and into another form. But I would say most important reference here in these works is really the work done in the 70s, specifically the performance work done at that time, done by women. And I'm a child of the 80s, so we were thinking about things like consumer critique and so forth. And I was certainly looking at feminism from the 80s, but my heart was really more connected to the viscerality of the performance work done by women in the 70s. So I was thinking that I was actually doing something very traditional. I was interested in the body, in figurative sculpture, but I thought rather than to describe the body, what I would do is talk about it by the residue it left on the object. And I would do, the most traditional thing I could do as a sculptor, and that was to carve. But rather than use a hammer and chisel, I decided to use my mouth and to take an everyday activity like eating and turn it into this sculptural process. So the chocolate was really about eliciting desire in the viewer. I know that you look at 500 pounds of chewed chocolate, things come up for you. And I thought if I could do that, then you would turn around and look at the lard and be totally disgusted. And then I would take that lard and turn it into lipstick, which is what we wear to make ourselves attractive, so somebody will give us a heart-shaped box of chocolate. So after doing that piece, which is called Gnaw, I decided if Gnaw dealt with sculpture, now I wanted to do a piece about painting. And I would take the same strategies. I would take an everyday activity and turn it into some kind of painting process. So I chose mopping the floor. And I thought, well, if I'm thinking about my body as a tool for making, that my hair would be a pretty good paintbrush. And if I'm going to paint the floor with my hair or mop the floor with my hair, what material should I use? And I thought Loving Care hair dye natural black would be a good choice. So it's a performance piece, and when I start the piece, the room is filled with people. And slowly, as I mop the floor, people are mopped out of the room. And what's important about this piece is that, of course, it's very vulnerable to be there on my hands and knees, mopping the floor, but it's very empowering to push people out of the room. And it reminded me of my mom, when she would mop the kitchen floor, she'd say, "Janine, go out and play until the floor dries." And so for me, she was claiming the kitchen for that time, and that this was a way for me to claim the space of the gallery or the museum. So there's some quotes here to other artists as well. I know you're all familiar with those dramatic images of Pollock doing his dance around the canvas. So I was certainly thinking about that, at least in the documentation, but More importantly, I was thinking about Yves Klein. Do you know these works where he put blue paint on the naked woman's body and they rolled on the canvas? What Klein said about those works was, rather than to paint the model, he wanted to paint with the model. And my response to that is that loving care is really about wanting to be the model and the master at the same time, and the inherent conflict of those two desires. So this is my drawing equivalent to loving care. It's called Butterfly Kisses. The medium is CoverGirl Thick Lash Mascara. There's 1,142 winks on each page done with either eye. I can do about 60 winks a day. That's my cutoff point in masochism. So they take me quite a while to do. So I'm thinking about, in these last works, about aesthetics that have been passed down to us through art history, but also ideas of woman and beauty, and how, if I work with those in a parallel way, how I could call them both into question. So here I am, and I'm hanging above a tub that's filled to the top with lard, and I get myself lowered into it. I thought I was just going to magically sink into this tub, but it didn't happen. So I had to get my friends to bury me. So there I am under the tub, and I don't know if you can see, there's like a clear tube in front of the rope, so I'm breathing out of that, and they flattened out the tub, so they removed all of the fat that my body displaced. Then I get pulled out very dramatically. So what you get is a pretty detailed image of my body in the tub. Then I took that amount of fat that my body displaced, I mixed it with lye and water, and I made that cube of soap. And this time I sculpted the cube by a couple weeks of washing with it. The piece is called Eureka, and it's inspired by the story of Archimedes, which most of you probably know. But Archimedes was asked by the king how much gold was in his crown, and he was killing himself. How can he measure capacity? And he's in the bathtub, and he realizes that his body's displacing the water in the tub, jumps out, screams Eureka, and runs through the streets naked. So I'm very inspired by that story for a couple of reasons. One is that Archimedes' body was the tool for the experiment, just as my body's the tool for making. But more importantly is this idea that he came to this knowledge through the experience of his body. So that's pretty much why I do these extreme acts. I know that you have a body, and you can imagine what it's like to chew on 500 pounds of chocolate or be dunked in a tub of lard, and I'm pretty sure you don't have a neutral relationship to that kind of behavior. So I'm interested in whether I can put you in the position of empathy with my process, which is different than we would normally approach a conceptual work of art, where we say very separate and we go through a process of decoding information to make meaning. I'm much more interested in you imagining what I've done to have that thing exist in the world, and then you can analyze your own response. So I kind of think of Eureka as my next big breakthrough after Wien, the first piece I showed you. If Wien started with the body and worked its way into the culture, now I have started with my body in the tub, made the soap, and re-entered the picture to watch the soap. So there's this kind of circular behavior going on. And actually, if we think about lard as the material of the body, then I've kind of entered the cube, and then I'm washing myself with myself. So that brings us to Lick and Lather. So now I thought I would use a representation of myself and literally be washing myself with my own image and feeding myself with my own image. So the reason we have 7 classical busts in chocolate and 7 in soap is because the Greeks used to believe that 7 heads was the classical proportion of the body. Of course, by the time I've washed and licked them, they're all different sizes, so we've gone against that notion. The piece was originally conceived of for Venice. I knew that there would be classical sculpture everywhere and that this would somehow relate to the site, but then I arrived in Venice, And I saw these stone sculptures, and as you know, everything is eroding away in the most beautiful way in Venice. And I saw these stone sculptures that look very much like my soap heads, that the features had been washed away. And I thought, what does that say about the inevitability of our mortality, that even stone has a lifespan? So I started the piece with kind of obvious ideas. First, self-portraiture. Why have we done that for so many years? And I came up with this idea of really it's about immortalizing the self. And I'm working with chocolate and soap, which are ephemeral materials, so that really goes against the grain of that. The other idea is that you make a portrait as a way of presenting yourself to the world and thinking about what is the best way to self-present and feeling like, are we really more ourselves alone having a meal or having a bath at night? And what would it mean to represent the self through these everyday activities that we all can relate to? So having the soap in the tub with me was this sort of very loving act. It was almost like having a baby in there, washing them. And it occurred to me that it was very loaded because even through this loving act of washing and licking, I'm slowly erasing myself. So I thought, what does that really have to say with, our relationship to our outer image? It's always this kind of love-hate relationship we have with our physical appearance. So I started to think about this aging process, not as something that happens to you, but that the way you choose to live your life is the way that you choose to age yourself, and that could be a creative act. So this work is called Slumber, and I was thinking about, again, these everyday activities and how to turn them into a sculptural process. So after doing those pieces you just saw, I thought sleep is another great activity to try and transform. And I couldn't figure out what the material of sleep is. It didn't seem as obvious as soap is to bathing or chocolate is to eating. And at a certain point, I decided that dreams were the material of sleep. Of course, dreams are immaterial, so that caused some trouble. And I went to the normal places, psychoanalysis, surrealism, and then I found this book on the physiological approach to sleep. And in that book, I found this machine called a polysomnograph, and it's basically an EKG machine, but it records. I used it to record my rapid eye movement while sleeping, and I learned from the doctor that your eye does a very particular movement when it's dreaming. So I recorded on this machine over here a night of sleep. I went through all the information, like 2,000 pages of information, to isolate my dreams. Then I used them as a pattern to weave a very long blanket. So I slept in the bed at night, and then in the morning I got on the loom and wove my dreams into the blanket. So I used strips from my nightgown, and there's maybe 8 or 10 nightgowns now woven into the blanket. So I kind of slept with my dreams in 2 forms, first by having them and then in the form of the blanket. So here I am in the museum sleeping at night, recording my dreams. And here's the machine. So for me, it was something like the butterfly kisses. Interesting to think about art as seeing, but what happens with the closed eye and the looking inward? And I was so in love with this machine that science had somehow made a machine for the body to make a drawing. And so very much like winking my eye on the page. But this was a kind of automatic drawing without an intercession of the conscious mind. And then I made the loom, and the loom is not like any normal loom. Its warp threads stay connected to its spools, so it's always in the state of potential. And here I am in the museum weaving. So it was really interesting for me to be in my work talking to my viewers as they were looking at it, and I got to take this piece to many places in the world, and I became fascinated by different cultures' readings of the work. I first did it in London, and you know how the British love to strut their literary knowledge, so I thought I was there to tell the story of the woman weaving, but they were quoting me Shakespeare and The Lady of Shalott and so forth. And then I went to Zurich, and they were terrified to talk to me. I had to develop some bedside manner to get them to talk to me, and I did a talk like this, and all these Jungians turned up, and they just wanted to talk to me about archetypal symbols and the collective unconscious. And then I went from there to Spain, and I was so concerned because I didn't speak Spanish, and I learned some, enough to be able to tell the story. And in Spain, it didn't matter. They were touching the threads, sitting on the bench next to me. We somehow communicated. And then I went to Greece, and of course, it was about Penelope and the history of the loom. Several times in the United States, and what primarily people want to talk to me about the polysomnograph. What can it tell you about your dreams and the science? So it's not like people didn't get to the other readings in the book, but they seemed to be these cultural similarities that really interest me. But the most startling part about the experience is how people bring their personal life story to the work. So people would tell me about their fear of sleeping alone, the dream they had the night before. One woman walked in and said, "Oh, you have a dream catcher above your bed too." I had never thought of all those threads as a dream catcher. So as an artist, of course, I'm always trying to anticipate how the work will be read and how I can communicate. But what I learned from this experience is, I can never know your personal life story and how much that feeds. That's really the dominant thing that feeds into your reading of the work. So this is my mom and dad. And this is my mom and dad. And this is my mom and dad. I thought it would be really cool to turn my mom into my dad and my dad into my mom. They weren't so excited about the idea. But they are very supportive. I work with a prosthetic makeup artist to teach me on my parents how to sculpt them into one another. He could have done a much better job, but I was interested in the idea that they had made me, and now I would turn around and remake them. I have to say that they're the best material I've ever worked with. My work is very much about identity. My sexual identity plays into that very strongly. They are my role models in terms of how I understand my own gender. And so it was perfect to try to turn them into one another. But as I started to work, I became really interested in the impossibility of that. What I was getting was this half mom, half dad creature, a kind of caricature or composite of the two. And then I decided this is just another self-portrait, because that's what I am, a biological composite of the two. So this is me, and mom is dad, turning dad into mom. My dad is a plastic surgeon. So this is Nari Ward. We are at the Shaker community, Sabbath Day Lake, where I brought 2 600-pound limestone boulders there. I placed them on top of each other, with the pole coming up through the center, and another pole coming out through the top stone. And for about 5 hours a day, I walked around in a circle. The idea came to me in Delphi. I went to Delphi and I saw these incredible stone walls, and there was no mortar between the stones, and the stones were meeting perfectly flat. And I said to my friend, "How is that possible?" And she said, "Oh, they rubbed the stones together till they were airtight." And my hair stood up on end because I thought that's the most ideal relationship. Two forms sculpting each other simultaneously. So I thought, I'm going to make my version of Brancusi's kiss. So I started walking around my stones, walking, and instead of them becoming flat, I shouldn't have used limestone because limestone is harder in some places and softer in others. They became quite articulate in that space in between, so there was a hard part over there that carved an upside-down bowl in the top rock, and then this side met ever so gently, and that center started to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and I thought, maybe this is a much more interesting way to think about a relationship, that rather than this notion of marrying and merging, maybe it's much more interesting to think about carving the space between. So I named the piece A&D, to talk about that space. So this piece is called Mortar and Pestle, my husband's eye and my tongue. I like to say that the inspiration for this piece is to know the taste of his vision. Of course, I'm being facetious. Vision doesn't have a taste. But I don't know about you, but it's always been confusing to me to look into the eyes of someone I love and wonder what they see when they look back. And knowing you can never really know that. So this piece is called Cradle. What you're looking at is a big shovel from a construction tractor, and what I did is I cut that shovel in half. I took half of it and I melted it down, and I cast it into these objects inside. So what you're seeing inside being held by the cradle is an agricultural bucket, an excavator, a snow shovel, a garden shovel, a fireplace shovel, a serving spoon, a soup spoon, and then a baby spoon. It's the spoon you first give a child when it's learning to feed itself. So this brings us all the way back to wean. I'm really interested in those moments of separation from the mother. And even though we have this desire for independence, we never lose the desire to be held. So this is a sculpture that is holding itself. This photograph is called Coddle, and it's exactly what it looks like. It's an image of me holding my leg as if it were a baby. And I was thinking about making an image that was sort of like the Madonna and Child, but I was reading this book by Jeanette Winterson called Written on the Body, and the first line says, "Why is the measure of love loss?" And I went back to Coddle and thought this piece is really about the Pietà. It's not about the Madonna and Child, it's about what's not there. This piece is called If I Die Before I Wake. It is your standard prayer nightlight made of porcelain. And the only strange thing about it is one hand is mine and one hand is my mother's. My mom and I our hands are eerily similar. And now my daughter has the same hands too. But now that she's gotten older, arthritis has set in and she has the wrinkles. And I just wanted to put those two hands together to contemplate my own aging and death. And, you know, my daughter's now 13, but when she was young, she had a really hard time going to sleep. And I spent countless hours trying to take her from the wake state to the sleep state, and really wondered about what is that fear of surrender into sleep, and does it have something to do with our fear of death? This piece is called 2038. It's named after the tag in that cow's ear. I have a thing for cows because I grew up in an island where there was only one cow on the whole island, and we would drive half an hour to look at this cow like it was a monument. So I got to this place in Sweden, and they had a working dairy farm, and I asked right away to go visit the cows. And then I found out something that probably most of you know, which is that they use bathtubs as troughs. So the first thought I had was, what is that cow doing drinking out of a tub that's made for me? And the next thought was, would it still drink if I got inside? So I got inside, and I learned that cows are very curious animals, and this one came and drank as if it was drinking from my breast. And, you know, I think it's really interesting that we breastfeed from our mother and we're sort of weaned onto the cow. She's like a surrogate mother or a wet nurse or something, but we never know her intimately. And so this was a way to get to know her. And the reason I named it 2038, because that seemed to epitomize our relationship to the cow. It's hardly an animal to us. It's some kind of biological machine that we don't have a relationship with. So when I got married, I was driving in the car with my mom, and she turns to me and she says, "Janine, I would like to give you the family silverware, but I know you'll never clean it." And I'm thinking, is this a compliment or criticism? So I took the family silverware, Reed and Barton Rose Cascade with the monogrammed A for Antoni, and I cast the negative impression of my mouth on the one end and the negative impression of her hand on the other. It's solid silver, and it's called umbilical. So I thought it's pretty loaded that she wants to pass down to me this object to feed others, an object that's loaded with notions of domesticity and class. There's Mom. So I'm trying to make a familiar image that you might know, like a Vermeer or something, woman in a domestic setting, and might be so familiar that it'd take a while for you to realize there's actually 3 feet coming out from under the dress rather than 2, and then you know I'm still having problems separating from my mother. So this is part of the cow obsession. I got a hide sent to me straight off of the cow. I made a mold of myself on my hands and knees in 5 parts that screwed together, and I threw this wet piece of skin over the mold, and it took 24 hours for it to shrink and harden. And then I turned it over and removed the mold. It's a very airy piece because you feel both the absence of me and the absence of the cow when you look at it. It's called Saddle. So a while back I got a call from a friend of mine, and she said, "I saw this thing online. I think you'll be really into it. It's an apparatus for women to pee standing up." There's a lot of them on the market. There's a Shewee and a WizBiz. This is a Travel Mate. It's for those situations when you don't want to sit on the seat. And the crazy thing is, I am really into them. When I was a little girl, I'm from the Bahamas, and we are really into pirates. And my brother was reading this book, and it was about this pirate named Anne Bonnet. And she disguised herself as a male pirate by using this apparatus for peeing standing up. Well, I never forgot the story because I thought that was the coolest thing. So I definitely wanted to make something out of this object. And I have this other memory. I went to school with nuns, and the nuns used to tell me that my body was a temple. And I didn't understand that was that, nobody should touch it and, all that stuff. I thought, I'm architecture. So that seemed really cool too. So I kind of put those 2 memories together, and I turned the Travel Mate into a gargoyle. This is a griffin. It's cast in copper because I don't know if you know this, but I was thinking about the copper pipes in your bathroom, but I wanted the urine to be part of the work, and urine is an excellent patina. So that's why that mouth is all blue. And all I needed was a place to pee off of. So I thought, of course I should pee off of a cathedral because my body's a temple, but for some reason, I don't know why, no one would let me pee off of their cathedral. So in a desperate act, I called my gallery, and lo and behold, I got permission to pee off of the Chrysler. And there happens to be griffins on the Chrysler. So you know about a griffin, it's a half bird, half lion. So that seemed right because it's a kind of hybrid, and when I use my instrument, I become a kind of hybrid. But right when we went to take the peeing and we went to take the photo, the wind blew, and I kind of got to be the lion and the pirate, I think. The piece is called Conduit. That's how it's shown. This piece is called Inhabit. It's 11 feet tall. I'm life-size in the photo. And it came to me dancing. I was dancing with an older woman, and I got this image of a spider making a delicate web between two branches of a tree. This woman was a dance therapist, and she was holding space from my very delicate movement. And I had been reading Winnicott at the time, and I was trying to figure out how to be a good mother. And I was reading about the good enough mother, and Winnicott's idea was that a good mother is not overbearing to the child, but is always present, so that if the child needs them, they're there, but they can become independent and unfold in their own time. So I had this idea that I wanted to make an image where a spider had made a web between my legs. So I started to chase this image. I started to call all the spider experts, Gainesville, different places around the United States, and they were all like, not so sure that can work. The heat of your body, you have to stand still all night. I'm like, I'm a performance artist, no problem. Then I started to worry about that. So I called up some places to get a harness, because I thought I would harness myself up. Spider makes the web, take the harness off, take the photo. And I call up this harness place. I don't want to say the spider thing. And finally the guy's like, listen, lady, I've seen it all. Tell me what you're doing. And I explain. And he said, I got the perfect harness for you. This harness that had many ropes, and it's used in the movies for when there's an explosion, the body has to go back like that. And I looked at it and I was like, oh my God, it's a spider web. So I thought, it's got to be included in the photo. And then I was like, well, how am I going to keep the spider between my leg? It's going to go in my hair and make a web, and that's not right. And so I was going to put this a cage below and then take that off, and after the spider had made its web. And then I thought, if it's a web within a web, why not a house within a house? Then I got the doll's house, got it retrofitted to my body, and spider was a very good assistant. It worked all night, made a web parallel to the picture plane, stayed there. I put this thing on 15 times to get the photo. Of course, no one could care less about the spider, but it's the way I got to the image. But this is my spider, of course. Decided to make the web in the kitchen. And this particular spider I found between the rungs of my daughter's swing. So that was interesting. And this is my daughter Indra when she was a baby. And it's the first time I gave her a spoon to feed herself. And instead of putting it in her mouth, she stuck it in my belly button. And I screamed to my husband, come and she's making my work. So, and he took the image, and it was so touching to me, this kind of gesture of reciprocity, that she was sort of sending me back to my own, memory of being in the womb. So I've been obsessed with crowning for quite a long time. Do you guys know what that is? When the baby's about to come out, it turns around and engages the hip bones. And I'm one that is called crowning, but this idea that you're crowned by your mother just as you enter the world is so beautiful to me. So for years I've been trying to make a piece about it. I found that, those plastic bones that, if you go to the chiropractor or something, they have the whole skeleton. I found that I could buy those bones, and they could give me the history of the persons whose bones they were. So these are bones of childbearing women. And then what I did is I made the bowl on a wheel, and while the clay was still wet, I used that inner part of the bone to shape the vessel. And I did several. This is one that shapes the neck of the vessel. This is a ding. It's made after a traditional three-legged vessel, Chinese vessel, which was used for cooking on the fire. this surface that you're looking at is because it's fired in a pit of flames. This is called hearth, and this is shaped by the coccyx. And it's kind of my Muybridge version of birth. You know, the painful part is when that coccyx has to sort of, the sculptural moment when the coccyx goes back and the head comes through. And then I thought about crown molding. So I turned that out and used it as an instrument to make molding, and then left the hip bones there. It's the process of making it. This is a work I've done in 2 museums, at the Hayward and at the Brooklyn Museum, and I spent a lot of time fantasizing about the viewer and what they're thinking and what their relationship is to the object even after they've left it. It really guides me in what I make. So I was in this show called Move, Choreographing You, and it was about how the object choreographs the movement of the viewer as they walk around it. And I was so blown away by this concept that I tried to make a piece to meet the curator's vision. And so it's a letter written to the viewer as if the object watched the viewer walk around it, and what would the object think. And then I convinced the institution to sneak this love letter into people's personal belongings at the coat check. So it's like written on a page ripped from the pamphlet of the museum, and then later when they're on the subway or they're home or they're doing their laundry, they find this letter. Can I read it to you? The minute you saw me, you came straight over and then stopped, as if you couldn't think and move at the same time. It seemed that you'd come to some conclusion because your thoughts started to lead you with such intensity. It was as though you had taken me into your body. I remained still, quietly absorbing my surrender to your desire. You came so close to me that I felt the breeze of your movement on my surface. Swept away by your burning attention, I felt as if I was made for you. I was completed by your presence. Will you carry me in your memory, or is that too much to ask? The Brooklyn one is a little tougher. This is the one from the Hayward. I caused a bit of trouble with that one. So lately I've been really interested in milagros. Do you know what these are? These are these little body parts. You find them in Brazil, Mexico, Portugal, Greece. They come in the medallion size and also in life size in wax, and they are prayers for healing. So you would take these to the church if you had an ailment with the hopes that you would be cured of your ailment. So the idea of making a sculpture to heal really captivated me. So I was asked to do a set for Stephen Petronio, who is a choreographer at the Joyce, and I made, instead of making a set, I asked him if I could perform as well, and I hung myself. This is his dance over on the right. On the left is me hanging in a helicopter stretcher at the Joyce, just like this, over the audience. And then all of my body parts cast and floating, and I am contemplating myself in parts. And my hand is coming out of the helicopter stretcher holding this searchlight, and I didn't move for the entire performance. So that brought me to my last show that I had at Loring Augustine, where I started to work more closely with these body parts and sort of situate them in space. So what you're looking at is crossed legs. You know, when I was little, my Auntie Eileen, who was British, came over every Tuesday to have tea, and she would say, "I want to teach you to drink tea like a lady," which always meant crossing my legs. So I always wondered what that had to do with being a lady and modesty and so forth. Now that I'm really interested in somatic practices in my body. I know that crossing your legs is the worst thing you could do. You should all uncross your legs right now. So these two are modeled together, so they can't ever be uncrossed, but we're really crossing the future leg with the present leg. And then I don't know if you're familiar with Greek and Roman sculpture, but they have these things called struts, especially the Romans, who weren't very good at making a body stand up because it's very hard to do. They would use the stump of a tree to support it. So these crossed legs are kind of tethered to this stump of a tree. But I'm really interested in why we associate the feminine with this narrowed base. You know, we see it in toe shoes and high heels, that the feminine is like the ethereal. But, you know, we know that the strongest form is broad at the bottom and is rooted. So I took these gestures, but what I was really interested in was the experience of embodiment, how I could have these impossible meetings happen, how the exterior of the body could meet the interior of the body. And I used gestures from everyday life. So you all know that romantic gesture of being in bed with a lover and putting your head on their chest to hear their heart. So the sad thing about this piece, which is called Talong, is that I wanted to hear the heart so badly that the ear is melted straight through the chest and come on the other side. And of course, there's no heart to be heard. And then I thought, where should this gesture exist? And I thought, well, a pillow would set it back in the bed, and then I would put that pillow on a pedestal to bring it back into the gallery space. So these are two spines entwined like snakes and crawling across a woven rug, trying to get as close to the other as possible. So imagine a hug. Imagine if you could, what is the most embracing hug that could ever happen? What if your ribs could open right up and fold into one another? So that's what I did. I took two rib cages, took them apart, and had them literally become one. And I walked around with this thing for a very long time until I turned it upside down and saw that it was a basket. So I added that handle, and it made the most beautiful form. Let's see if I have it here on the inside. So really thinking about, you know, the potential of that space on the inside, that we come together for the potential of something else to happen. So my last project, which was at the Fabric Workshop, and I don't know if you know, it's in Philadelphia, and they have an expertise of working with fabric, and many artists you know have worked there and done every conceivable thing with fabric imaginable. Working with Stephen Petronio decided that we were actually going to swallow fabric. So we got NAMI to make this 10-foot long piece of hand-woven fabric, and we started on either side of that fabric and swallowed it till it went down into the gut. So we wanted to connect at the gut. And so what we did is we did that performance, and this is a reliquary that we made to house that object that we swallowed. It's plated gold, and that form is taken from the organs of the body, particularly related to swallowing. And at the top is the epiglottis that has a magnifying glass that shows you the place where our lips met on the fabric. And then we asked 10 people to witness this act. And we chose them sort of going back to slumber, thinking about their individual expertise and how they could bring that to the reading of what we did. So we gave them these very mythical names. We chose a poet for his use of language to retell the story, because a lot of performance art we know through oral tradition, so we want to start off well. We got two twins, 3-year-old twins that are connected in the womb. The healer is a body worker. The mender is a medical person that works with swallowing disorders. The framer is a photographer that took one picture of the event. The defender is a lawyer who talked about it very forensically. The mole digs the subways, and the listener is a couples therapist. And this is the installation, and you sat in these conversation chairs, and you had speakers above your head, and you could listen to the story of what happened, but you never saw what happened.
I think it's kind of both. There's that, the lay person viewing this like, wow, this is like a strange performance, or, one of a kind performance going on. But, there's the clinician me is also looking at the tongue. It's like, how are they moving that piece of cloth to the back of the mouth, how frequently they're swallowing. Now I see the larynx elevating as they're swallowing that cloth, oh, he burped there, and probably swallowed too much air, things like that. So, I think that's the combination of being the layperson and being the clinician. Yeah.
My interest is of looking at this gauze as a surrogate for language, right? As a stand-in for the thing that is the unspoken, and there. And it is shared, and it is mutually understood, is mutually intelligible, and
So I was photographing it, so I was making sure that it was funny because I'm so used to photographing dance and performance that things are moving really fast, and I'm always trying to like frame it and catch the movement, and this was so slow, but in fact it was fascinating because it was so slow, and I was watching the fabric go from being very loose to getting more and more tight, and then there was that moment. So I was really concerned with, and when that moment kind of went, like, it was like the high point of the crescendo, and I was thinking that I caught it, which was good because I wanted to, I wanted to make sure that I caught it on film, and it was very powerful, really, the two of them meeting like that, But then when they came apart and it came out of them, I wasn't expecting that, I guess. I don't know. I just and that sort of felt like a release, I guess. So it was like a lot of tension, and then this culmination of coming together, and then this release.
An introjection psychologically means swallowing whole. It's taking in another person, like a child taking in a parent, through imitation, identification. But introject means to basically take in, and comes to mean taking in without chewing, but just swallowing.
So then we took this one image, we printed it on wool, and we introduced several colonies of moths. And during the exhibition, it slowly ate away at the documentation of the performance. So I think I'd like to end with my last piece and with the love of my life, Anna Halperin, 97-year-old choreographer from the West Coast, really the mother of a lot of the choreographers that have come to define postmodern dance. And I was very fortunate for the last few years to be able to work with her. And when I asked her if she would collaborate with me, she decided to give me a part of a work called Parades and Changes that she made in 1965 when I was 1 year old. And she said, I know exactly what to do with you, Janine. You know what to do with material, so I'm going to give you the paper from Parades and Changes. And together we made this work called Paper Dance, which I first performed on her outdoor dance floor in Kent Field. And she didn't give me much instruction. She gave me the paper and told me that I could remove my clothes, and then she kind of let me go at it. And I worked with the paper for years. And my student who came to photographed me doing it said, "Wow, I saw every piece you ever made in the paper." And I thought he was just being a smart artist. And then later I looked at these images and I saw that I was, I'm not a seasoned improviser, and what did I have to pull on but my past work? And so that was pretty startling. And when I decided to do the work at the fabric workshop, I decided to bring 37 of my works done over 20 years in crates. And each time I performed the piece, I unpacked one work and let the work influence the improvisation. So this is the installation. And this is what was left in between performances. And this is the video of the original Parades and Changes that Anna Halpern did. So it was really her past work meeting my past work. And then this is some images of it done in Sweden in 1965. And here I am. The performance starts with me unpacking the work. And people don't quite know that I'm performing until I go and get the paper. But I'm not a dancer. Somehow Anna figured out a way that I didn't have to dance, that I could just do what I normally do in my studio alone as a performative act. So once I had the paper, I knew exactly what to do. And as you can see, the paper's pretty provocative and takes all kinds of forms. And it threw me straight into my unconscious in a way that I've never experienced before. Thank you very much.